Finally, I get to go back to the normal lightbox. The big lightbox is so much more convenient than the constructed one I used for the original week of Big Boys. So much more convenient. It is still, however, not convenient. So now that the week of slightly less Big Boys, the combining, is over, now we can move on to the week of Bumblebee figures, the only week that's pretty much guaranteed to never get an annual sequel. They've pretty much released a version of every character from that movie so far, so in a year's time, this line will be over and I won't have anything to talk about on it. But at least we have this week to celebrate these figures. And in this one, I think no matter what I say, I'm gonna piss someone off. Because I've never seen this before. Usually there is some kind of consensus. This time, hell no. I'm used to it being where either most people love a figure and I'm the only one who hates it, or most people hate a figure and very few people love it. This time, it's 50-50. You either love this thing or you hate it. It's Studio Series Bumblebee movie Ratchet. And quite frankly, I don't get the disparity, because this thing is fantastic. How is something this good hated by so many people who aren't me? I'm the guy who hates the stuff that's still good. Why are you all stealing my bag? I have seen people complain to death about aspects of this figure I would call features. And I mean, it light pipes and I'm still defending it, so you know it has to be good. So, as a version of Ratchet, I'm already in love with it. It is such a complete reimagining of what he looks like while still looking like him. He's no longer the monster from Jeepers Creepers the other movies had him be, but they still left not 1 inch of him the same. This is so unique and so different, with the massive shoulder pauldrons, new angular aesthetic, and how they took his window chest and turned it into like an angular observation port. It also makes him look kind of dumpy, but in like a cool way. The original design had the spirit of the dad bod held within it. That was still clear anytime you looked at it, to the point where Transformers Animated just adapted that into physical form. And this feels like that design just before he got a couple years older and his chest fully descended into his gut. Honestly, despite the chonky appearance, he comes across a bit like a brick shithouse. This is helped by the fact that he is a larger deluxe by modern standards. This is a lot closer to what that used to mean. He's still not as big as figures past, but if this were the new average deluxe scale, I'd feel less ripped off. Also, I'd feel less ripped off if they just keep using the amount of paint we see here. You know me, not one for paint, blah blah blah, but if a figure is going to be small, and it's going to be hollow, and it's going to come with very little, because plastic prices are high right now, so you are charging more, then at least give us some paint. That's not affected by plastic prices, damn it. Give us something worth the money we are paying for these. I don't care about paint, but I would love to feel like we weren't being taken for a ride. And this has a lot of paint, and it's big, and it's well designed, and it's recent, so people can take the argument that Hasbro can't do better and shove it. One thing that's a bit silly about this design is the faux forming tires. Normally I'd rail against this, but I understand why it's here this time. The design was actually thrown together very quickly after test screenings of the movie came back with a desire to see more Cybertronian stuff. This was only ever intended to be in the movie as a robot. There was not one thought put into how this would transform because it didn't matter, this wasn't going to ever. So, when the toy makers had to take this design and turn it into plastic, they had to work with what was in the design. And what was in this design was wheels that could never go where they needed to. So I do get it this time. It would be ideal if it didn't have the fake tires, but I can't blame this toy for it when it's doing so much other stuff so well. Now, one thing a lot of people really do have to suffer through on this is that it is loose. Believe me, I can sympathize with that. My last review was a nightmare of loose joints, and that can truly ruin a figure. But a lot of people don't seem to view this as a figure that is ruined by bad tolerances, but a figure that just isn't good in the first place, and I have to disagree with that. If the QC were better, I think this would be great. I can say that with confidence because my QC here is actually pretty good. It's a little loose in a lot of places, but I've handled much worse. And to be clear, that's an absolute miracle, because this was shipped with a 20-pound chunk of metal in the same case, which did this to his box. I've never seen that before. It punched straight through the clear plastic window, smashed up the box, and the figure is fine. So while yes, I won the QC lottery this time, it does at least let me see this thing in its true light. The bad joints will truly ruin it, but without those loose tolerances, this is a good figure. I only say it so much because it seems like specifically this time, a lot of people aren't recognizing that. The backs of the legs and the insides of the wrists are very hollow, but the legs do give some nice added functionality, and the wrists do a good job of disappearing into the design. The head is great, doing an awesome job of capturing that new alien face of his, that honestly kind of looks like a skeleton monkey. How is this still less horrifying than it used to be? I am only realizing now that his hands are supposed to be red. You got the head crest and yet more paint on the face distinguishing that part a bit, though perhaps too much of a nose. The Bumblebee design of him didn't really seem to have much in the way of a schnoz. It's like they were trying to find the happy middle ground between the Bumblebee movie Voldemort face and the absolute honker of the Bay films. This light pipes, and I'd prefer it if it didn't, but it actually does one of the better jobs I've ever seen here. Yes, it ruins the back of the figure's head, but it does so with a by far smaller clear piece than normal. And it collects the light admirably, meaning that in normal light, the eyes still come to life, unlike many other figures who need to be shoved inside of a light bulb to get half this good. I'll always prefer chrome dyes, but this is a good example of the feature. And you know what really strikes me about this whole design? While none of it looks the same as the G1 version, you take the color completely away and it's still obvious who this is supposed to be. You wouldn't even mistake it for Ironhide because they managed to fit in the most key details. And yeah, the look of this thing kind of rocks. It manages to be so much more busy and detailed than the G1 design without being confusing as to who I'm looking at. Yes, that was mostly the new movie designers being good at their jobs, but this figure does a great job of mimicking that. With maybe the worst part of it just being these hinges on his ribs. This guy really only comes with one accessory, his gun. This is intended to be a bit generic, and it looks a lot bigger in pictures than it feels in real life, but this is still good. You can peg it onto his back, but only on the left side, which they very easily could have just mirrored the port, so I don't know why they didn't do that. Personally, I'd have it here instead of down there. And I guess he also comes with this backdrop, which is the same one that comes on the Ravage and Shockwave, just bigger. So yeah, this doesn't come with much, and what it does come with is slightly lackluster, but not terrible. But you know what is terrible? Not the posing, because that's actually great. Head has more range than normal, shoulders pull a strong 90, you can fake a forwards butterfly, normal 90 elbows that recede a bit. We need a name for this kind of wrist action. How about posh wrist? That brings up bad memories for me. Question of the video, what should I call this type of articulation? This here is the feature I've seen people rail against. If you unpeg his stomach, then you get a good side crunch at his waist. This is awesome! Why are people not happy about this? If you don't like it, then you can just peg in his stomach a little tighter. But me, I'm going to use this for scenes like, I'm not drunk. You're drunk. Give me more end checks. Completely unimpeded legs, normal 90 knees, but if you push past this light hump, then they jump to maximum knees. Though you can't really get anywhere between those 2 points, and toe down with a barely there pivot. So yeah, posability is extremely good. Everything that is there either has standard levels of posability or well above that. And he has several specialty joints, with one of them being almost unheard of on a deluxe. And I don't get why people don't like that one. So yeah, the posability is fantastic, and so is the transformation. This really does not work how I thought it was going to at all. Basically, the chest is the exact inverse of what I predicted, the whole torso flips inside out, and then the legs really don't do much. But they become the front of the alt mode, and I just didn't expect any of it, and it's really fun and interesting. My only problem with it is that I have no idea why, but sometimes the arms just refuse to not scrape on the ground, preventing it from rolling well. I'll transform it, and it just absolutely will not ever work, then I'll start over and do it again, and I just have them pop into place perfectly and easily in a way that seemed impossible before. And I literally don't know what changed because I didn't think I had any more room than I already had for them to do this. This is a pretty cool little space buggy. It reminds me of something you drive around in Red Faction Guerrilla. It really does feel like some kind of moon rover. Maybe like a moon explorer or a moon Winnebago. Something with like its own atmosphere and maybe a kitchen in the back. The only thing really kind of hurting that image is just how much this guy manages to squish down in this mode. This is like if you took the Siege version and cut like a third off its top and like 40% off its back. You can stick the gun on the roof and that just doesn't look threatening at all, but hey, weapon storage. And it's pretty tidy from the underside too. So this is a really good little alt mode and a great figure. Seriously, if the tolerances are what's ruining this figure for you, I'd say invest in some joint tightener and thicken this boy up, and I think that might really turn you around on it. And if you're like me, whose joints out of the box weren't great, but they were decent, then you are already having a good time. I don't know how Hasbro let tolerances this inconsistent slide, or what's happening to cause them in the first place, but outside those, this thing has everything to love about it. It's a unique, good-looking, accurate to its source material robot mode, with great posing, a fun and interesting transformation that does stuff you've probably never seen before, and a good little alt mode. It's well painted, the plastic is solid and tough, and it's fun. If your tolerances are bad, it's a tragedy because they are ruining a really good little guy. I recommend it, and if yours can't stand up because of loose joints, I recommend that you invest in some products that will help with that, because this thing is good enough on its own to try and upgrade it to its full potential. And that's not half what I have to say, but it's enough what I have to say. And I know you know what everyone else tells you to do at the end of these videos. So, if you liked what you saw here, please do that. And if you'd like to take it a step further, then please, share this video with any friend you think may be interested. I hope you all enjoyed listening to me waste your time.